The thunder of hooves shattered the night silence as Isaiah Davidson rode hard toward the amber glow on the horizon, his heart pounding against his ribs. Fire in these parts meant death, and death in the Montana Territory of 1875 came swift and merciless. The dancing flames grew larger as he urged his stallion faster across the moonlit prairie, the smell of smoke growing stronger with each passing moment. "Come on, Thunder," Isaiah called to his horse, leaning forward in the saddle. The homestead ahead belonged to Old Man Willard, who'd been expecting a mail-order bride from back east. The thought made Isaiah's stomach twist. He'd seen the letter in town just yesterday when helping Willard collect his mail. As he approached, the cabin was nearly consumed by fire, its roof already collapsed inward, sending a shower of embers spiraling into the night sky. Isaiah pulled his bandana over his mouth and nose as he dismounted, searching frantically for any sign of life. Willard's body lay sprawled near what remained of the front door, his unseeing eyes reflecting the inferno. "Hello," Isaiah shouted, circling the burning structure. "Anyone alive?" A muffled cough from the far side of the cabin caught his attention. He rounded the corner and froze at the sight before him. A woman was crawling away from the blaze, her dress singed and torn, her face streaked with soot. She collapsed onto the hard earth, her strength seemingly spent. Isaiah rushed forward, shrugging off his heavy duster coat as he ran. He knelt beside her, gently turning her over. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23. With delicate features now marred by ash and a nasty gash across her forehead. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, draping his coat over her trembling form. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of summer bluebonnets. "Help," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the flames. "Please." "I've got you," Isaiah assured her, carefully scooping her into his arms. "You're safe now. I give you my word." The woman's head lolled against his chest as consciousness slipped away from her. Isaiah carried her to his horse, mounting with practiced ease while keeping her secure in his arms. He spared one last glance at the burning homestead before turning Thunder toward his own ranch 10 miles east. "Hold on, miss," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. "Just hold on." The journey back to his ranch felt eternal, each jolt causing the woman to whimper in her unconscious state. When the familiar silhouette of his modest 2-story home finally appeared, Isaiah released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His ranch hand, Miguel, came running at the sound of approaching hooves. "Madre de Dios, what happened?" Miguel asked, helping Isaiah dismount with the woman. "Found her at Willard's place. Whole cabin was engulfed. The old man didn't make it," Isaiah explained grimly. "She needs a doctor." "I'll ride for Doc Peters," Miguel said, already moving toward the stable. Inside, Isaiah carefully laid the woman on his bed and lit a lamp. In the warm glow, he could better assess her injuries. The cut on her forehead needed tending, and her hands were raw with burns. He fetched a basin of cool water and clean cloths, gently cleaning away the soot and blood from her face. As he worked, her eyelids fluttered open again, panic immediately flooding her features. "Easy now," Isaiah soothed. "You're safe. I'm Isaiah Davidson. I found you at Willard's place." "Willard," she repeated, her voice cracking. "My intended." Tears welled in her eyes. "The fire, it happened so fast." "I'm sorry, miss. Willard didn't survive." A sob escaped her lips, though it seemed more from shock than grief. "I only just arrived today. I'd never even met him before." "What's your name?" Isaiah asked gently. "Rebecca." "Rebecca James," she answered, wincing as she tried to sit up. "I came from Boston. We'd only corresponded through letters." Isaiah eased her back down. "Rest now, Rebecca. The doctor's on his way." "Thank you," she whispered, clutching his coat that still lay draped over her, "for covering me with your coat and your word." Dawn was breaking when Doc Peters finally arrived, his weathered face grave as he examined Rebecca. Isaiah paced outside the bedroom, guilt gnawing at him. He should have checked on Willard earlier. The old man had been excited about his bride's arrival, planning to meet her stagecoach. When had things gone so terribly wrong? "She'll recover," Doc Peters announced, closing the bedroom door behind him. "Smoke inhalation, minor burns, and that gash on her head will leave a small scar, but she's young and strong." "Thank God," Isaiah murmured. "Any idea what happened?" "Can't say for certain. She mentioned the stove was smoking when she arrived. Willard was trying to fix it. Could have been a chimney fire that got out of control." Isaiah nodded, running a hand through his dark hair. "What happens to her now?" The doctor shrugged. "She's alone in a strange territory, no family, no husband. Not many options for a woman in these parts." "She can stay here," Isaiah said firmly, "at least until she decides what she wants to do." "Careful, Davidson," Doc Peters warned with a knowing look. "Town's already gossiping about the bachelor rancher with the city woman in his house." "Let him talk," Isaiah replied, his jaw set. "I'm not putting her out." 3 days passed before Rebecca was strong enough to leave the bed. Isaiah had been sleeping in the spare room, giving her privacy to recover. When he entered the kitchen that morning to find her at the stove, wearing one of his shirts with the sleeves rolled up, he stopped short. "You shouldn't be up," he said, unable to stop his eyes from taking in the sight of her. Even in his oversized clothing, with her copper hair messily braided, she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Rebecca turned, offering a small smile. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough, Mr. Davidson. The least I can do is cook you breakfast." "Isaiah," he corrected, moving to the table. "And you're not imposing. You nearly died, Rebecca." She placed a plate of eggs and bacon before him. "Nevertheless, I need to figure out what I'm going to do. I used every penny I had for the train ticket west." Isaiah frowned. "No rush. Winter's coming and jobs are scarce. You can stay here until spring if needed." "People will talk," she said softly, sitting across from him with her own plate. "People always talk. Comes with the territory." He took a bite of eggs, nodding appreciatively. "These are good. Thank you." A blush crept up her cheeks. "I worked as a cook's assistant in Boston for a time." Over breakfast, Rebecca shared more about her life back east. Her parents had died of influenza when she was 18, leaving her to fend for herself. After 3 years of working in other people's homes, the prospect of marriage even to a stranger in the untamed West had seemed like a chance at a real life. "And now I'm right back where I started," she concluded, staring down at her hands. "No," Isaiah said firmly. "You're not alone this time. I meant what I said when I found you. You're safe here." The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Rebecca insisted on earning her keep, taking over the cooking and much of the housework. Isaiah found himself looking forward to returning from his long days tending cattle, just to see her smile of greeting. Sometimes they would sit by the fire in the evening, and he would read to her from his small collection of books, or she would share stories from her childhood in Boston. As October turned to November, the first snowfall blanketed the land. Isaiah returned from checking on the herd to find Rebecca by the window, watching the snowflakes with childlike wonder. "We had snow in Boston," she explained at his amused expression, "but never so pristine. It always turned to gray slush almost immediately." "Come on," he said impulsively, grabbing her coat. "Let's enjoy it properly." Outside, the world had transformed into a silent white paradise. Rebecca laughed as she tilted her face to the sky, snowflakes catching on her eyelashes. The sound of her joy made Isaiah's heart swell. Without thinking, he gathered a handful of snow and tossed it gently in her direction. Her mouth formed a perfect O of surprise before her eyes narrowed playfully. "So that's how it's going to be, Mr. Davidson." What followed was the most undignified snowball fight the Montana Territory had likely ever witnessed. By the time they stumbled back inside, they were both breathless with laughter and thoroughly soaked. "You fight dirty," Isaiah accused, shaking snow from his hair. And you underestimated a Boston girl, Rebecca countered, her cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Isaiah suddenly became acutely aware of how close they were standing, how her damp clothes clung to her slender frame, how her lips had parted slightly. He cleared his throat and stepped back. "Better get changed before we catch our deaths," he said gruffly, moving toward the hallway. "Isaiah," Rebecca called softly, stopping him. "Thank you. For everything." He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak, and continued to his room. That night, as a blizzard howled outside, Isaiah lay awake, wrestling with his growing feelings for Rebecca. She'd come to marry another man, was still grieving that loss in her displacement. The last thing she needed was him complicating matters with his affections. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He sat up as Rebecca entered, wrapped in a quilt. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said, hugging the quilt tighter. "The wind, it reminds me of the fire." Without hesitation, Isaiah moved over and patted the bed beside him. "Sit. I'll light another lamp." She sat perched on the edge of his bed as he lit a second lamp, casting warm shadows across the room. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked. Rebecca nodded slowly. "I keep seeing it. The flames. Willard trying to drag me out before the roof collapsed on him." Her voice broke. "He was a stranger, but he died saving me." "That's the kind of man Willard was," Isaiah said gently. "Gruff as a bear, but with a heart to match." "I found his letters," she continued, "in your coat pocket. I hope you don't mind that I read them." Isaiah shook his head. He'd forgotten about the letters he'd collected for Willard that fateful day. "He seemed kind in his writing," she said, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I wonder if I could have grown to love him, given time." "I believe you would have," Isaiah answered honestly. "He was a good man." They talked through the night, the blizzard eventually subsiding to a gentle snowfall. Rebecca shared more about her hopes for coming west, and Isaiah told her stories of his own journey, how he'd left Kentucky at 18 to seek his fortune, working cattle drives until he saved enough to buy his small ranch 7 years ago. As dawn approached, Rebecca finally dozed off beside him, her breathing deep and even. Isaiah watched over her, his heart aching with tenderness and longing. "What am I going to do about you, Rebecca James?" he whispered, carefully tucking the quilt around her shoulders before slipping from the bed to start his day's work. Thanksgiving arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. Isaiah had invited the few neighboring ranchers and their families for a modest feast, partly to introduce Rebecca properly to the community, and partly to silence the persistent gossip about her presence in his home. She had spent days preparing, baking pies and bread, and planning the meal around the wild turkey Isaiah had hunted. When the guests arrived, the Hendersons from the next property over, Doc Peters and his wife, and the widowed Mrs. Larson with her grown son, Rebecca, greeted them with such natural grace that Isaiah couldn't help but feel proud. "You've brought civilization to Davidson's bachelor domain," Mrs. Henderson declared, looking around the spotlessly clean home with its festive touches. "We barely recognize the place." "Isaiah has been most generous," Rebecca replied diplomatically. "I'm simply repaying his kindness." Throughout the meal, Isaiah noticed how easily Rebecca conversed with everyone, how she remembered details from previous brief encounters, how genuinely interested she seemed in their lives. Even young Larson, normally taciturn, opened up when she asked about his plans to expand their sheep herd. When the guests had gone, leaving behind warm wishes and invitations to future gatherings, Isaiah helped Rebecca clear the table. "They adored you," he said, carrying a stack of plates to the wash basin. Rebecca smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "They're good people. I'm grateful to be welcomed." "What's wrong?" Isaiah asked, sensing her melancholy. She sighed, setting down the serving platter she'd been holding. "Mrs. Henderson asked about my plans for the future. If I intended to return east come spring." "And do you?" The question hung heavily between them. "I don't know," she admitted. "There's nothing for me in Boston, but I can't stay here indefinitely, living off your charity." "It's not charity, Rebecca," Isaiah said firmly. "This place, it runs better with you here. It feels like—" "Like what?" she pressed when he hesitated. "Like home," he finished quietly. "A real home." The confession hung in the air, raw and honest. Rebecca's eyes widened, and for a moment Isaiah feared he'd said too much. Then she stepped forward, placing her hand gently on his arm. "It feels that way to me too," she whispered, "and that terrifies me." Before he could respond, she turned away, busying herself with the dishes. Isaiah watched her for a moment, hope and uncertainty warring within him, before joining her at the wash basin. They worked side by side in companionable silence, their shoulders occasionally brushing, each touch sending sparks through Isaiah's veins. As Christmas approached, the ranch transformed under Rebecca's touch. She'd fashioned decorations from pine boughs and berries, and somehow convinced Isaiah to cut a small tree for the parlor. They spent an evening decorating it with paper stars she'd crafted and a few precious glass ornaments Isaiah's mother had given him years ago. "I haven't celebrated Christmas properly since my parents died," Rebecca admitted as they sat before the fire, admiring their handiwork. "It was always just another work day in someone else's home." "We'll do it right this year," Isaiah promised, reaching for her hand without thinking. She didn't pull away, and his heart soared. "The whole tradition, Christmas Eve service in town, presents in the morning, a proper dinner." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "I'd like that very much." On Christmas Eve, as promised, they rode into town for the service at the small clapboard church. Rebecca wore her best dress, one Mrs. Henderson had altered for her from her daughter's old things, with Isaiah's coat over it for warmth. The townspeople nodded in greeting, some with genuine warmth, others with thinly veiled curiosity. "Reckon Davidson's finally found himself a missus," Isaiah overheard someone whisper as they took their seats. "Mail-order bride meant for old Willard," came the reply. "Davidson snatched her up after the fire." Rebecca's cheeks flushed, indicating she'd heard too. Isaiah leaned closer to her. "Ignore them. Small towns run on gossip." She nodded, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. After the service, as they prepared to leave, the minister's wife approached them. "Miss James," she said warmly, "we're so pleased you've joined our community. I was wondering if you might consider helping with the school after the new year. Our teacher, Miss Wilson, is expecting and could use an assistant." Rebecca's face lit up. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Collins. I worked with children back in Boston for a time." "Wonderful. Come by after the holidays and we'll discuss the details." As they rode home through the starlit night, Rebecca could barely contain her excitement. "A real position, Isaiah. My own wages, my own purpose." "You'll be magnificent," Isaiah said, genuinely happy for her, though a small part of him worried what this might mean for her future and their unspoken bond. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear. Isaiah woke to the smell of coffee and cinnamon, finding Rebecca already up and preparing breakfast. Under their small tree lay 2 carefully wrapped packages. "Merry Christmas," she greeted him, her smile radiant. "Merry Christmas," he returned, suddenly feeling shy as he handed her a small package. "It's not much, but—" Rebecca unwrapped it carefully, gasping when she revealed a delicate silver locket. "Isaiah, it's beautiful." "Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny pressed wildflower, a blue Montana lupine. "I pressed it last summer," he explained. "Reminded me of your eyes." Tears welled in those very eyes as she looked up at him. "You thought of me before we even met." Isaiah shrugged, embarrassed. "Not exactly. Just seemed right to give it to you." "Help me put it on?" she asked, turning and lifting her hair. His fingers trembled slightly as he fastened the clasp around her slender neck. When she turned back, the locket nestled perfectly at the hollow of her throat. "Now yours," she insisted, handing him his gift. Isaiah unwrapped a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "When did you make this?" he asked, running his fingers over the intricate pattern. "At night, after you'd gone to bed," Rebecca admitted. "Do you like it?" "It's perfect," he said honestly, immediately wrapping it around his neck. "Best gift I've ever received." They spent the day in contentment, cooking together and sharing stories of Christmases past. As evening fell, Isaiah built up the fire while Rebecca poured 2 glasses of the spiced wine they'd prepared. "I have a confession," she said as she handed him his glass, settling beside him on the small sofa. "I received a letter last week from Boston, a former employer offering me my position back with increased wages." Isaiah's heart plummeted. "I see," he managed. "Will you go?" "I wrote back declining the offer," Rebecca said softly. "My life is here now." Relief flooded through him. "Because of the teaching position." Rebecca set down her glass and turned to face him fully. "Because of you, Isaiah. Only you." The words he'd longed to hear for months hung in the air between them. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Isaiah leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. She responded immediately, her hands coming up to frame his face as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, both breathless, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Rebecca James. Have since the moment I found you crawling from that burning cabin." "And I love you," she whispered back, "though I think it took me until the snowball fight to realize it." Isaiah laughed, pulling her closer. "Will you stay? Not just in Montana, but here, with me. As my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. 1,000 times, yes. New Year's Day of 1876 dawned bright and cold as Rebecca stood beside Isaiah in the same church where they'd attended Christmas Eve service. Just a week had passed since his proposal, but neither saw reason to wait. Doc Peters and his wife stood as witnesses, along with Miguel and Mrs. Henderson. "I, Isaiah Michael Davidson, take thee, Rebecca Ann James, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he recited, his voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Rebecca's eyes shimmered with tears as she repeated her own vows, promising to love and cherish him all the days of her life. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaiah gathered her in his arms, kissing her with a passion that earned a few chuckles from their small audience. The modest reception at the ranch was filled with warmth and well wishes from neighbors who had grown to admire Rebecca over the past months. As the guests departed into the winter evening, leaving the newlyweds alone at last, Isaiah pulled his bride close. "Happy?" he asked, searching her face. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Though I keep thinking about how we came to be here. If not for that terrible fire." "I believe some things are meant to be," Isaiah said seriously. "I'd have found you somehow, Rebecca Davidson, one way or another." "I like the sound of that," she murmured against his lips. "Rebecca Davidson." As spring arrived, bringing new life to the ranch, Rebecca's teaching position flourished into a full-time role when Miss Wilson decided to focus on motherhood. Isaiah expanded their cattle operation, hiring 2 more hands to help manage the growing herd. Together, they built not just a successful ranch, but a true home one, filled with laughter, love, and eventually, the patter of small feet. Their firstborn arrived exactly 1 year after they wed a son they named William, after Old Man Willard, whose tragic passing had brought them together. As Isaiah watched Rebecca nurse their infant son by the hearth that had once warmed just a lonely bachelor, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed. "What are you thinking about?" Rebecca asked, catching his thoughtful gaze. "About promises kept," he answered, settling beside her and gently stroking their son's downy head. "When I covered you with my coat that night, I gave you my word that you'd be safe. I never imagined it would lead to this." "Your word and your coat," Rebecca smiled, leaning into him. "And now your name, your home, your heart." "Always," Isaiah promised, sealing it with a kiss as their son slept peacefully between them, the first of 4 children who would fill their home in the years to come. The Davidson ranch grew to become one of the most prosperous in the territory, known not just for its fine cattle, but for the hospitality of its mistress. Rebecca's school eventually expanded into a proper building in town, where she taught generations of children, including her own, until her hair had turned silver. And on warm summer evenings, long after their children had grown and started families of their own, Isaiah and Rebecca could still be found sitting on their porch, hand in hand, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of amber, the same color as the flames that had once brought them together on that fateful night when a mail-order bride crawled from a burning cabin and a cowboy covered her with his coat and his word.